Recording.
Well, we are back.
Hi, everybody. We're back.
We are back in the second location of our neoliberal war room in beautiful scenic Times Square, and we are here today with Vanessa Place, who is an artist. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here.
Dasha.
Vanessa published a book recently that is a transcript of a performance art piece that you do,
Right.
where you recite rape jokes for
about 45 minutes.
Cool.
Yeah.
And if you guys like rape and you like jokes, you should check it out.
This is the book for you.
Yeah, this is the book for you. And so this book, you said it came out about a month ago.
Right, approximately, yeah.
I was just telling the ladies that I read this book yesterday as research, and I was like rolling on the floor laughing. There's a lot of good stuff in here, but we should talk about.
But it's sort of meant to be heard.
Yeah, the interesting thing when I perform it is what I've seen every time is the people that start off in the audience not going to laugh. Mm-hmm. At some point, something strikes them as being very funny. Mm-hmm. And then they're in a moral quandary at that point.
Right.
And then conversely, the people that start off laughing, at some point something is too much.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then they catch themselves.
Have you perceived, like, do you have any sense or data for what the threshold is? Is it the pedophilia jokes?
You know, it depends on your preferences or lack thereof. Some people, pedophilia is too far. Once in a while I'll do a Q&A after a performance, but I always think that's part of the performance. And
Sure.
So one of them, I said, well, I'm not going to answer any questions, but I'll ask questions. Mm-hmm. And so I asked people, did anybody find any of the jokes funny? And some people said yes. And so I asked them which ones. And what I noted after people told me which ones was that none of the racist rape jokes people thought were funny. So for some reason, rape was still vaguely humorous, even in that audience, but not racism
too
coupled with
far.
race was.
Yeah, I noticed some of the ones that I personally, I guess I think you and I are probably like unoffensible because we're Russian and like we kind of. At least I grew up with this sort of humor, but I when I read the race ones, I was kind of like, this is probably what's going to piss a lot of people off.
Yeah, but even with that, because they're all Anglophone jokes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you make jokes about, for example, Mexicans in the United States, people identify that as a racist joke.
Sure.
But if you make a joke about a Paki in the United States, people don't particularly, or many people don't.
Right.
And so they may feel more comfortable laughing, whereas if I do the same performance in the UK,
right,
people might laugh at a Mexican joke, but they're not going to laugh at a Paki joke. So
That's
again, it's sort of, people are still it's very context specific.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing because it really kind of brings into sharp relief that these categories are very arbitrary, and like that there's, I think, what it
malleable,
yeah,
subjective,
yeah,
sort of like rape.
Here I'm gonna. Well, this is true. Yeah, the Paki joke was I raped a Paki girl last night. Her parents arranged it. And what does the Muslim girl say to her rapist? I do. And it's like, I think the trouble with those kind of jokes is that they basically bring into sharp relief the pre-existing racial stereotype in the joke. And of course, the thing with stereotypes is that they're all based in like a modicum, a kernel of truth, which is what makes people uncomfortable.
Right. There's a two joke, because some of the jokes, obviously they build. And I think there's a two joke one in there of what's white on top and black on the bottom, society. Mm-hmm. What's black on top and white on the bottom, rape.
Right.
And so it's, you know, and I'm not going to say that's a modicum of truth, but that does fit a stereotype that resonates as being somehow the case.
People are able to perceive it.
And also it's the classic joke thing of you take the one thing nobody's going to argue with, which is the structure of racism in the United States, and then you take it to you take it that one step further.
Yeah.
Were there any jokes in the book for you, Anna, that made you uncomfortable?
No. And I read Dave Hickey's forward, and I read Natasha Stagg's afterward, and they both, and they're both writers that I like a lot. And admire, and they both kind of suggested that they were made uncomfortable at some point, and if they are, good for them, because their minds and hearts are gentler than mine, and if they're lying, shame on them, because they should have just
sucked it up.
Yeah, just sucked it up and stood by it. And that's the thing. It's like, Dave Hickey's right. Like, there's absolutely nothing funny about rape or pedophilia or any sex crime, but I think that's what makes the jokes a touch funnier, because it like touches on some like compulsive part of our mind that automatically goes to like the worst case scenario.
Yeah, and that's what's in some ways the difficulty of a word like rape, because it actually covers a number of different things.
Right.
And I've said before, rape, I have to say this very carefully. Rape actually isn't a thing. Rape is a verdict.
Right.
Rape means that a bunch of people basically decided that a certain sexual encounter was not consensual.
Sure, yeah. I never thought of it that way. But.
And you're a lawyer as well.
Right. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I only represent sex offenders on appeal.
And do you still...
I still do that, because apparently performing rape jokes in public is not quite the cash cow one would imagine.
This is what you find, that this is what you realize as any sort of like creative person, is that your creative platform is never enough to pay the bills. So you have to do something like be a lawyer.
What inspired the project to begin with? And
initially, I became interested because there was a sort of a little controversy on Twitter a while ago, maybe about 5 years ago, where a British comic told a rape joke on stage, and then there was this uproar saying, well, rape jokes aren't funny, you can't tell rape jokes. And I thought, but they are funny, and there's a reason why they're funny. And so I started doing research, and I ended up in a few places in the web where people tell each other offensive jokes. And it's actually a social media community. Right. So they tell each other these jokes and they vote whether they like them.
Are we talking like 4chan and Reddit? And that sort of
actually a little bit more specific sites. There was a site that used to be pretty great called Wikipedia that then seems to have fallen off. But it was very vibrant at the time, and there were categories. So if you liked racist jokes, and then there would be subcategories. Oh, do you want to hear Muslim jokes? Do you want to hear African-American jokes? That kind of. And even within the sex jokes, there were rape jokes, prostitute jokes, bestiality jokes. You could be very specific. And a couple of things that interest me was, one, that it was a social media community. So people voted on jokes, whether they liked them or not. If people violated the rules of the platform, like retelling the same joke, they would be ostracized.
They would be raped.
Yeah. So they're very strict. But I started looking at all these jokes, and I started sort of harvesting the ones I liked. And then I started realizing that after a while that I could make some of them a little bit better. So I started to, so to speak, massage them. And then after a little bit longer working with the material, I just started becoming really interested in the form. And then I started writing a few of them as well.
So in this book, I think I forgot, one of the people who wrote kind of like supplementary materials mentioned that you had written some of your own jokes.
Yes.
So that's like part of the fun, is like guessing which ones you authored written, and which ones
and which ones
you had inherited.
I've improved.
How many
you
of
wrote
the jokes?
This one about Freud that I thought was very clever.
It's a little cerebral, but I think there's not that many really good jokes.
It's
about
niche.
Freud.
Yeah.
So I was happy with that one.
I'm going to read it.
Go ahead.
Freud said that a joke is a discharge of repression and hostility, often sexual, often violent. So it looks like the joke's on you.
That's great. I love that. I actually just got it. I'm a little slow, and I'm still recovering from the 55 milligram edible that I accidentally ate.
Like 4 days ago.
4 days ago, yeah. So like how many, like what percentage of the jokes in the book would you say are tampered with?
Oh, tampered with? Probably 20%.
Okay. I mean, some of them are just so stupid. You can tell
they're beautiful
like,
on their own.
Yeah, it's like a game of
they're
telephone,
perfect
because the joke has been like mangled through successive iterations. I was shocked that my favorite it's not exactly, I guess all pedophilia is rape, but the Jewish child molester joke.
The sequence, yeah, there's a nice sequence.
Yeah, but I don't, the one that I really love didn't make the cut, I guess. Do you know this joke?
Which one?
Have you guys heard of the Jewish child molester? He pulls up in a white van and says, "Hey kids, you want to buy some candy?"
Oh yeah, that one should have been in there. I think my favorite version of that is the same setup with the white van.
Yeah.
And he says, "Hey kid, easy on the candy."
You what?
He says, "Hey kid, easy on the candy."
Maybe not so much candy.
Yeah. But it's the jokes themselves are really interesting in the way that it's almost how like memes function on the internet, where like one meme format comes out and then it folds into another meme format.
Right.
And it's actually just like interesting from that level, like how information travels through.
And when you hear the performance, there's a flow to it, so that the language gets a little heavier, then it lightens up. There's a kind of rhythm to the performance, which can vary between like the jokes that are bits of stories versus the one-liners and that kind of thing.
And then, of course, to have them performed like by a woman,
right,
also contextualizes them.
A woman in a suit,
right?
Is that deliberate?
Of course, everything is deliberate.
So, how is the performance informed by your work with sex offenders?
Well, I do. I mean, I do wear a suit. It's true. So I dress like a lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm a representative. I'm representing.
Right.
And a couple of times I performed it. There was a performance festival in Tallinn, and I performed the piece. And for the first 2/3 of the performance, I'm just sort of uplit with a baby spot. The mic is a mic on a stand. It's very intimate. I tell the jokes. The audience is in the dark. It's a little. They can do whatever they want. It's fine. Now masturbate, laugh, sit there uncomfortably. It doesn't matter to me. And then about 2/3 of the way through the performance, I always step back, and suddenly I'm backlit, so they can't see me anymore. I'm just a silhouette. Okay. But I can see them, and they can see each other.
Right.
And the sound source shifts to a headset mic and monitors that were they were on risers, and the monitors were beneath them. So the sound was coming up into them. It was a little rapey.
Very violated.
Very, very rapey. But that shift between I'm the entertainer, I'm the performer, and oh no, actually you're the performance.
Right. It's like, like many of those jokes, like jokes on you, like the one about the guy who runs up on the gorgeous blonde in Central Park and is like, "Hey, are you a model?" And she says, "Yeah, you can see me on the back page of whatever magazine." And he replies, "Well, you're going to be on the front page tomorrow, honey."
Yeah, and one of the somewhat dumbest, but I also think quite elegant joke that I in fact wrote is, "If you don't like rape jokes, why did you come?"
I like that one
really
too.
Good.
The simpler ones are the best. But it also made me think, and I think somebody else mentioned this, like the word rape itself and how we use it kind of metaphorically. Like when you say that you're about to be like raped, not sexually, like if you're about to, drink or do something grueling, work a lot. And it made me think of like all the times that I've flippantly said that like going to see a performance piece feels a little bit like rape, because it's always kind of a hostage situation, if you see.
Kind of, but there is one of the objections when I've worked with this or done these performances is people will say to me, "Oh, telling a rape joke, that's like raping someone." And I always point out, I say, "Well, you can walk out of a joke."
Right, exactly. And that's, I think I read like a Los Angeles Review of Books article about your Gone with the Wind piece. And the woman was saying, well, the criteria isn't whether a work of art re-traumatizes, but whether it says something kind of new about the world. And I'm not sure that art can ever materially change anything, but what these jokes do essentially is that they force people to think and to draw their own conclusions.
Right. And that's, to me, coming from, in part, the world of law, which is highly functional. And also, I think America itself fetishizes functionality and use, and something has to do something in order to be worth anything.
Well, right. Like, I mean, even efficiency, like the whole techno-capitalist argument for efficiency.
Well, it's kind of dumb efficiency, but efficiency. Yeah. But we always want, and the demand that art do something in order to justify itself, again, seems particularly American to me. And one of the things that I'm interested in art is not that art, in fact, I think that's art's great value, is it actually shouldn't do anything. It just should hold things in a state of suspense. Right. And in that suspended state, you can think through something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's sort of like a gateway drug for your own mental processes and faculties to take over.
And to think, well, it's even with a painting, something as simple as a painting. I don't stand and look at paint on the wall unless it's art. Right. But it does stop me in time and space to focus on something.
To consider something.
Yeah, which is completely, that experience is virtually non-existent now because people are always like jetting back and forth and like looking at their phones. I'm looking at you, Dasha. Just kidding. I'm actually like refreshing my feed. But then I was thinking also in terms of like the idea that rape jokes are kind of equivalent to the act of rape itself. It's that's also a very kind of classically American argument. It's like almost like going to like a movie theater and watching a train barrel at you at high speed and kind of confusing your position and the screen and thinking that the train can like break through the screen and hit you. There's like this collapse of categories, which I see a lot with like even like the call out culture and the culture of denunciation on Twitter, where like somebody like you comes under fire for being like a racist or a rape apologist because you merely engaged with this material. Could you maybe talk a little bit about your critics' claims that you are these horrible things?
Well, and I've said this before, I'll say it again. I always say my critics are always right because they can decide what they want to decide. Right. So I never argue their conclusion because that's their synthesis of whatever information they've decided to engage with. But there, you know, for example, with the Gone with the Wind project, I remember seeing a comment somewhere and when the petition came out to get me off of something, and somebody wrote, "I'm signing this petition because racism is wrong." And I thought, well, that's true. Sure. But I don't know if this is the blow that's going to, in the direction that will actually do anything about that. And so it's, to me, what's interesting again is this, you know, there's a couple of parts. First, there's the kind of classic idea of the scapegoat, that we pick a target that can be picked off and sacrificed so we don't actually have to address something. So for Gone with the Wind, the outrage against my project.
Could you briefly describe the project?
The project, I did a series of projects using Gone with the Wind as sort of source material, and ultimately my goal was to get sued by the Margaret Mitchell estate for copyright violation. Right. And my defense was going to be that so much of the depictions of African Americans and slaves in the book was based upon caricature and stereotype. You can't copyright a caricature or a stereotype. So it's as much mine as it is hers. I can steal it. Yes. So I kept stealing it over and over again, and I republished the entire book, and I titled it "Gone with the Wind" by Vanessa Place. Then I republished only the racist bits and titled it "Gone with the Wind" by Vanessa Place. And then one of the other things I did was I tweeted the whole thing, and it took 6 years, which was just a horror. But the estate didn't sue me. But what happened was, and part of the argument, this gets a little technical, but part of the argument was the avatar picture was Hattie McDaniel as Mammy in the movie. Character. And then the banner was a racist caricature from a piece of sheet music in the late 19th centuries with the exact same image. So this was part of this is just the same thing. It's a stereotype. So, but what the upset was that I was generating this racist material online or perpetuating it online, and using there was an accusation that I was appropriating black bodies. And my point was, well, no black people were harmed in the making of this project. That these are all figments of white women's imagination and white culture imagination.
Yeah, and do you think that the estate of Margaret Mitchell didn't end up suing you, because had they done that, it would have revealed the racist ideations of the original book?
I think they didn't sue me because there was no money in it. They weren't going to pay their lawyers to sue somebody who was just retweeting Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, I see. But I think it's good. Even so, it's like good to keep in mind that they probably also didn't want like the negative publicity associated with
the articulation of those positions. Mm-hmm. What was also, and they were well aware of the project, so it didn't go under the wire. But what was also interesting was the bandwidth of criticism. So on one side, this is racist, you have to stop. On one side, this is a great book, you should stop.
Of course, right. Yeah. And who were the critics primarily? Did you get a sense for for the demo of people telling you that this was racist versus this is a national treasure of a book?
Well, it ends up being, there is the group that is performing their kind of hyper-vigilant political awareness. And so they're the vigilantes that are looking for fissures. But I think it is also the nature of social media that it's a fundamentally antagonistic medium, right, that guised as a friendly medium.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this before, that it is basically designed to divide in the guise of bringing people together.
Yeah, it's hurting and culling all at once, constantly.
And so you issued an artist statement after this whole scandal, and you mentioned in it that Tara's theme was played over an Oscar acceptance speech for Django Unchained, which I didn't know, and that copies of Huckleberry Finn are routinely purged from public libraries, whereas Gone with the Wind has not been subject to nearly the same level of approbation.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's just a bit of dumbness. I think actually Huckleberry Finn is, it has language that people find offensive,
whereas Gone with
the Wind does, but it's not as rife. And also oddly or not oddly, depending on your state of paranoia, Huckleberry Finn, ultimately the character believes that slavery is wrong.
Right.
He actually, or I don't know if I can say that far, but there's a great scene in the book where he really realizes that unless he turns the fugitive slave in, he's going to go to hell. And he believes that he's going to go to hell. And then he decides he'll go to hell.
Yeah.
Which is pretty profound. So why get rid of that book? Sure. Versus the Gone with the Wind, which is a very romantic view of slavery, where good slaves love their masters and good masters love their slaves.
And slavery is just sort of taken as a given of the world with no implicit criticism.
The implicit criticism is you can have bad masters.
Right.
Like that's actually the problem, is if a master's bad, then it's bad, but otherwise it's fine.
Yeah, and you said I'm not sure if it was the statement, but you said, I'm not sorry for forcing white people to reenact the soft comfort of individual denunciation or the sweet meat of playing ally when the best status one can hope for is that of collaborator, because a lot of people were angry at you because they thought that you were sort of appropriating black bodies or whatever, capitalizing on black pain, like risk-free, and I'm wondering if you could talk on that maybe.
Well, that's the state of American history. I mean, in some ways, and this is part of the critics are always right, I'm not attempting to exculpate myself. I'm never attempting to stand outside of the structure or pretend I'm outside of the structure.
Yeah, and I think that's why, on the other hand, people like Kenneth Goldsmith, who famously, notoriously read an autopsy of Michael Brown as like a conceptual poetry project, or even like Dana Schutz with the Emmett Till controversy.
But what's interesting is, and I have the same kind of theoretical objection with objection to the abject, that the categories of people who adopt the abject as reparative or recuperative are the abject categories. So there's no, I don't understand the purchase gained by embracing. Let me put it a different way. If I'd come out with a strong statement condemning racism and saying, oh, slavery, that's wrong. First of all, that's idiotic,
right,
to reduce to constantly keep the conversation at point A. But second of all, that's also structurally the position of the white American woman, is to be the moral arbiter and the good moral exemplar and to teach.
Right.
So if I'm really against mastery, then I can't do that.
You can't.
I can only.
Condemn,
I just refuse to do that. I refuse the position. So I'm not going to assume that position of being the good moral white lady. That is my position structurally.
Right.
So all I can do is be a bad one.
Bad white lady.
Yeah. I mean, I think
lady.
that's basically our position too, which is why we get a similar amount of flack. But I really kind of live by the mantra that you should never, like if you operate in basically good conscience, you should never apologize or explain your work. But this made me think of something that...
or for example, the Dana Schutz painting that you mentioned earlier. When I saw the painting, I thought she should have put her fist through it.
She should.
That would have been to take it further not into recuperative or reparative or isn't this so sad? We know that. That's true.
Banal.
But as a demonstration, if you are going to render the violence of something like that, and especially as, well, I'm thinking about it as a performative, not as a painter.
Right.
But as a performative, you render that violence.
Right.
Well, maybe instead of sitting back while Hannah Black and all of her kind of allies called for the destruction of the painting, she should have just destroyed it herself.
Destroyed it. Though that would have been an interesting dilemma too. But it was when I had the performance at the Whitney that was canceled because of that. At one point, there was a certain point where
jokes or the
Gone with the Wind. It was actually a performance of another project that I do called Last Words, which is a sound archive of all the last words of executed Texas inmates since 1982. And at one point they said, well, they had gotten some what they called heat. And they said, don't worry, though, we've got bodyguards. And I thought, what body are you going to put next to mine that will make this okay?
Yeah. But yeah, that I'm always surprised kind of where people draw the line. And from what I understand, the Gone with the Wind project got a lot more flack than the Last Words project or the Rape Jokes project.
The Last Words project, nobody has been upset about. The Rape Jokes project, some people have. There was another project I did before the Gone with the Wind project where I self-appropriated accounts of rape and sexual violence from my legal work and presented it as poetry.
Right.
And people got upset about
They did.
that.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but I mean, something like that I think is like inherently more problematic if you want to use like that shitty, corny buzzword than the Gone with the Wind project, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, I guess it depends.
It depends, but
Right.
I think like it's very strange. I was reminded when I was thinking about like the Kenneth Goldsmith and Dana Schutz thing, because I think what those people did was that they put themselves, as you said, in the position of kind of like a moral arbiter and were extremely apologetic and, did this whole pathetic performance that weirdly made people more sympathetic toward them.
Right. But I think, again, to be a little bit abstract, that's also the structural position of the white person is to be ignorant. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I didn't mean, I didn't understand. But then that gets into this perversity of, explain it to me again.
Right. Yeah.
Tell me again. Racism, it sounds terrible. And it always makes me think, but after Nuremberg, if you were German, you couldn't sit there and say, well, I can't speak about the Holocaust because it didn't have anything to do with me.
Wait, you could or couldn't?
No, it would have been obscene for Germans after Nuremberg to say, well, I can't talk about the Holocaust because because that wasn't my experience.
Right.
You know, and it always seems a bit obscene when people tell me you can't discuss race because it's not your experience. It's like, well, no, we live in a racist society. I am racist. I don't have the experience of somebody who's African American, but I understand the experience of racism from a white perspective.
Yeah, and you can read the writing on the wall. I mean, that's always shocking to me when I think this is a social media phenomenon, or at least it's intensified by social media, the idea that you cannot speak, period, about the experience of someone who is outside of your kind of experiential zone. You can't speak about the experience of people of different races, of different genders, of different socioeconomic backgrounds.
You can't talk about rape if you have not been raped.
Right. And that becomes, on the one hand, I don't think it's a coincidence that the more we live online, the more we double down on this corporeal form as being somehow immutable,
right? Which
seems a little desperate. But then, on the other hand, it is also a kind of idiot position because somebody who's homosexual can talk about homophobia as a lived experience of reception. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's heterosexual could talk about homophobia as an experience of perpetration. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and both of these things are important.
Well, that was that was a beautiful aspect of some of the rape jokes where the guy calls the rape hotline and finds it's only for victims,
but who needs it more in some way?
Right, exactly. And I think there are a lot of these kind of like Freudian, essentially therapeutic kind of ideas, and I think that's why people seek out psychoanalysts, right? Because as the perpetrator, they're equally kind of complicit and guilty. That they have an equally kind of fraught experience.
No. I remember at one point I thought, oh, thank God I'm not a pedophile. Just think how complicated your life would be. Seriously. And how difficult.
I mean, pedophiles are really the bottom rung of
no one likes a pedophile. No one has any sympathy. Even the people they have sex with. So that's really lonely.
Here's another one. I'm going to read this last one. This is one of my favorites after the mime one. The hardest thing about being a pedophile is fitting in. But that's but in your work as a lawyer, you basically represent people like pedophiles on appeal. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And rapists and child molesters. And some pimps now and again.
Okay. And that's some pimps. That's
pimps.
I didn't even realize pimps still existed because like sex work or, prostitution has been so neoliberalized. Everybody is their own entrepreneur. Yeah. And you draw, so for some of your projects, you draw directly from
my legal work, yes.
Mm-hmm. How do you do that? Isn't there some sort of legal stricture?
It's an ethical gray area. Uh-huh. When I did a project called Statement of Facts, which was the sort of self-appropriation, and I made sure to change the names of victims.
Okay.
And change things that made them very specifically identifiable. I tried to keep the names within the same kind of demographic register, so you would get a sense if it was a Spanish-sounding name or something like that. But
you kept the names of
I kept the names of all police officers and people and experts, things like that, because I thought these are public people. People should know. That's fine.
Okay. Wow. That seems fair.
These are the government. So.
I was supposed to do a reading like a couple years ago, about right after the election. A girl called me about like 2 hours before and said that one of the men who was supposed to read had like sexually assaulted her friend, and she couldn't tell me which one it was, but that I should trust that this happened, and like she had to shut down the whole event, which she ended up doing because no one wanted to confront her about it. And she said to me, I don't think we should be putting microphones into the hands of rapists. And I didn't argue with her, but I remember distinctly thinking, like, I would love to hear from a rapist, honestly. Like, I think that
What made you do that? Like, why did you follow me into that dark
the post
alleyway?
Me Too era? There is, anytime a man sort of describes an experience of being canceled, like that Canadian radio personality,
Oh,
like
Gian
Louis
Gameshi.
CK, there really is. There's just like a zero tolerance.
And who was there was another guy who was like a publisher who wrote kind of a lengthy apologia, which is actually a shame because every time a man publishes kind of a long kind of apologetic, explicatory piece in like Vanity Fair or The Cut about how he's sorry for taking women on a series of bad dates, I think like, yo, that's like a bad move, dude. But actually those kind of articles are kind of unanimously met with rancor and outrage. And there's no room for men to speak in the current climate.
And also, there's no distinction between the Harvey Weinstein and the Louis C.K.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Yeah. It's a huge. Everything is kind of lumped under the like the shitty media men list, which lumped all manner of sexual transgression. Some of which were like of dubious transgressive nature. It was like, a guy
some
grabbing
of the problem
your
is
thigh.
just, it's patriarchy. Okay, yeah, patriarchy is a problem. So now what? Now what do we do?
Yeah.
I mean, aside from saying, well, let's get rid of it, which, okay, but what do we do today? And then the difficulty becomes, again, what we end up with is just apologies.
Yeah.
But it sort of reminds me of, when people used to lump weed and heroin.
Mm-hmm.
And say, see, drugs are bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well,
there's a spectrum.
There's a spectrum. And so there's the spectrum. And for example, I've had a number of cases where I have no doubt that the woman was raped in the sense that she ended up having sex and she did not believe she was not consenting.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same case, the man didn't rape her. He did not realize she was not consenting. He didn't understand that.
Uh-huh.
So what do you do with these where both are true? And to my mind, well, ideally you'd have, like, you have degrees of murder, you have degrees of rape, you have degrees of sexual violence. So the guy who thinks he just has a kind of not very good date is not convicted of the same thing as the person who
stalks
shoves you
somebody
down. Who comes through the bedroom window and gets you when you're asleep.
I was really struck by how many of these jokes, I mean, they're all sort of thematically organized. I have a question about that too, but I was struck by how many of the jokes were about guys like referring to their girlfriend who didn't know she was their girlfriend.
But she dressed up like a nurse for me.
Yeah. I was curious. So basically these jokes are organized into like loose themes like pedophilia, bestiality, incest, all of our favorite topics. And was it deliberate to have some of them kind of circle back? Like you have some pedophile jokes in the beginning.
Yeah,
and some
I didn't. It's not a joke book per se, so it doesn't have like a traditional joke book where here's all the pedophilia jokes, here's all the bestiality jokes. I say a traditional joke book,
like a reference book,
chapters. So it does mirror this performance, and so there's a certain amount of, again, circling back, reemergence of themes, but it also, when I do the performance, there's a way where the time and the rhythm flow. And what I also wanted with the book is you kind of have to read the whole book. You can't flip to just the section on rape and
exactly.
Yeah.
And the formatting was very interesting because one joke like kind of bled into the other, which I guess is designed to mimic
the performance.
The performance, yeah. I'm really excited to see this book on like the shelves of a MoMA PS1 or like the Swiss, what is it called?
The Swiss
Institute.
I'm looking forward to the audiobook.
Are you gonna do that?
I would love to do the audiobook. That would be great. Yeah.
How does that work? I mean, do you have to contract with the publisher?
I think the publisher contracts to do it.
Okay.
I do have an LP that, but it's very limited edition.
of the rape
me
joke book.
telling the rape joke. So it's
Okay.
20 minutes on each side, which I just sort of also love the violence
That's
of
fun.
the
Yeah,
LP.
flipping it
And you turn it over and the needle's going around. Hopefully it'll get stuck.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's like some static. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was this idea that Dave Hickey sort of touches on, which is that like after a while, one is reminded how profoundly our well-wrought words obliterate the aggressive scumble of the oral world. And he's talking about like kind of, I think, the world of like liberal, cordial vernacular, and then kind of the reality. And I've always thought it was kind of the other way around, that a lot of people, like particularly kind of like the liberal coastal elite people that run most of our kind of media platforms, and set kind of the tone of discourse, they truly interpret language as violence.
Well, language is a bit violent. And it can
Sure,
be, but
it
that's
is,
part
yeah.
of the beauty of it. And also sound is. I mean, you can't, the ear is the orifice we cannot close. You can't not hear sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is a bit of a violation, but I've always thought that part of the attraction to rape jokes is that I think that desire itself is experienced as a violation, whether it's coming from someone else towards you, especially if you didn't expect it or don't necessarily want it, or even in one's own desire can be experienced as a bit of a violation. You're going along minding your own business, you meet somebody and suddenly there it is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a way in which we're not in control of these things. And so I think what happens sometimes in the performance or with this kind of material is that sense of violation, you're put in that spot. I can't stop hearing this.
Mm-hmm.
This is reminding me of this thing that I can't control that can profoundly change me. I don't like that.
Yes, yeah. And I think the real
sex offenders know about that, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, but I think we all do. It's just that most of us can resist the urge to actually do something. But then we don't. It's like it's the level of you send that one text too many, and it's the one text too many, but you can't control that desire to do that. And that's a very low grade kind of violation.
Yeah. That women, by the way, are also guilty of in droves. It's just, we maybe can't overpower a man in the same way that he can overpower us. But, by their own standards, a lot of these Me Too feminists would be guilty of, at the very least, harassment.
Sure.
And that's coercion. And I think like the real reason that a book like this would make people uncomfortable is not so much that you're like listening to jokes about kind of an intolerable crime, but because it really forces people to confront their own compulsive thoughts.
Yeah. And again, when I do the performance or when somebody's reading the joke, when you hit that thing where you're laughing, or it's like there is no rape culture. It's just culture, and it's in you.
Yes. Yeah. That's another thing I wanted to bring up, this idea that we are living in the midst of some sort of rape culture. I don't think that's true, not in the United States. I think maybe you can elaborate on this, but what I see it as is a culture of fetishizing and obsessing over salacious details, like lurid details.
We get two pleasures right there.
Yeah.
We get the pleasure of the salacious detail. We get the pleasure of, tell me that terrible story again. Let me, wait, what did he do? What did he do? And the pleasure of condemning it. Well, that's precisely the structure of Law and Order SVU.
Exactly. And
I get to watch a rape, and then I get to watch the police. Mm-hmm. So it's very puritanical in its way.
Yes. Yeah. And it reminds me of kind of like the Me Too thing where why liberal feminists are so contemptuous of and critical of the patriarchy, because they have certain fantasies of male domination, whether they're like graphic or abstract, and they're ashamed of themselves for having them, even though those fantasies for the most part never go beyond the fantasy world. And I think like, the mark of character isn't whether or not you have compulsive thoughts, it's whether or not you act on them. So that's the difference.
The best you can do, I think.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing when I see somebody who proclaims themselves an anarchist or a feminist or something like that, and then they want to dictate how other people should behave and think. And it's like, well, you actually don't object to master. You just want to be it.
Yeah, you want to have some control. I mean, yeah, and that you see that in this culture of like punishing and policing.
They want to be the ones.
They want to be the cops to crack the whip. Yeah, yeah. They just want to choose the gulag. It's like, but shouldn't the ideal be no gulags?
Yeah, exactly. What do you make of this whole like leftist revival, like post Bernie thing?
Well, I mean, at the time, it really did occur to me that I realized there was a problem right after Obama was elected the first time, and I would see university students wearing T-shirts with a picture of the president on them, and I would think that's wrong. It doesn't matter how good or how much or whatever your fantasy is, it's still the president of the United States. And by definition, you should be against that person. You should be against that institution. You should not be celebrating it. And what I've seen with Bernie and Trump and social media, and a lot of it is this real love of authority and authoritarianism. It's just a flavor then. Do I want the flavor of the father that's Bernie Sanders, or do I want the flavor of the father that's Donald Trump? But why do you need the daddy? Why do you want the daddy? That would be more interesting to me.
Well, I mean, I think the idea of like self-governing is profoundly repugnant to most people. You know, I think like Eric Fromm or somebody said this, or maybe Quentin Crisp, that most people's actual
Eric Fromm or Quentin Crisp.
Yeah, those are my two. Yeah, no, I'm paraphrasing this, but they basically, whoever said this, they said, you know, most people's game in life is to offset responsibility for their life onto someone else. I think actually both of them said this in different ways. Fromm in a more academic way, and Crisp in, you know, a more raconteurish way. But
that's where the daddy comes in.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I recently reread one of Camus' books, and I do think it's worth going to a kind of existentialist mode at this point of we don't know how this will play out. And again, the right seems to have a sort of nostalgia for the past. The left seems to have a nostalgia for the future. But what do we do with the insoluble present? That's the question.
Yeah, that's the most annoying and tedious and difficult question that nobody wants to like.
Right. And without hope, there's no future that we're on a train riding towards.
No, absolutely not. And I think like people can almost like not fathom that it's really in their own hands ultimately at the end of the day. And I think I'm with you on the fact that I'm always freaked out. Like this last election, over the midterms, I saw a lot of people wearing like Obama and Clinton t-shirts, which I thought was really bizarre and perverse and masochistic. But there's almost like a confusion of the desire for authority and like celebrity worship too. Are authority figures, it's not enough that they're authoritarian, they also have to be like entertaining and celebrities.
Right.
The way people treat politicians as like benevolent celebrities.
Right, and in that way you might as well have a royal family.
Right.
Because at least they're properly fetishistic.
Yeah, totally. That's what always freaked me out about kind of the celebrity worship of, like, I understand the celebrity worship of somebody like Obama, who is like good looking and charismatic, or of somebody like Donald Trump, who's so repulsive and cartoonish. But I remember this distinct wave of like this narrative of positioning Bernie as like an affable old man, like a grandfather figure, which was profoundly repulsive. Like, you know, he's your representative and you're his
and it's also this
Corbyn, the same thing. It's the anti-charisma.
Well, it's like what we would like, an impotent daddy. Could I have one of those, please?
We've been, you know, once you've been raped by your dad one too many times.
Do you have any performances coming up?
Sadly, no. I wish I did. I've been having difficulty finding a venue that will be willing to host it.
I imagine.
A lot of emails do not get responded to from friends. So
Sure.
yeah, it's. I was very happy when Zizek blurbed the book, but I did have a very funny elevator conversation with John Waters where I told him about the book because the publisher was hoping that he might blurb it, and John Waters basically physically recoiled from me and said, "Are you out of your mind?"
Oh,
And
really?
I thought, well, it was surprising, but then I felt oddly proud too. So
that you managed to scandalize a person who had managed to scandalize large swaths of the American public.
Apparently, I'm a carrier. Yeah,
yeah, that's that's always good to know.
I guess I have a question about the virtue of provocation and why.
Well, provocation in and of itself is not very interesting. You know, so because it's easy, but that's the difference between you tell one rape joke, it's a provocation. It's a gesture to elicit a reaction of shock or offense or something. But if you tell 235 of them, it becomes something else. So there's something about time and duration too that happens. The other things that no one's really picked up about this book in particular is that it's copywritten. You can't copyright a joke, but you can copyright a performance.
Oh, I see.
And so now I own all the rape jokes. So you have to ask my permission to tell a rape joke.
Only you have the power.
I have to consent for someone to tell a rape joke.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the meaning, or like on a really stupid base level, the meaningful difference is that if you tell one rape joke, you're just trying to get a rise out of people, and if you tell 235, they know that you have some skin in the game,
so to speak. First of all, I would just like to appreciate the phrase use of get a rise and skin in the game all in one sentence with regard to it.
I think this this edible I was telling Dasha has made me infinitely stupider, but it's also expanded my artistic horizon, so that's good.
Congrats.
Yeah, I really liked kind of the puns in the book. They were very funny.
Why did you come?
Well, why did you come is a good one there.
Let's see.
It gives rise to many of them.
Yeah. I'm trying to see. I had some other notes.
My favorite rape joke in the book. Well,
yeah,
there's a couple that I really, really like, but one of my favorites is they say that 90% of all rape victims were raped by somebody they knew. But shouldn't that really be someone they thought they knew?
Yeah, I love that. I think I liked, this is a really brilliant one that kind of, I think, synthesizes the purpose, the meaning of the book. Recently, after an attempted rape, I started carrying a knife. My rapes are much more successful now. That like it's very interesting to kind of pivot things in terms of the perpetrator versus the victim. There was a book probably like 10 years ago called Tiger Tiger by Margot Fregoso, which outlined it was a memoir. It outlined in detail her relationship with her child molester, which spanned from like 4 to 16 when she became too old for him to find him. Yeah, she aged out. And it's the book got a lot of flack because there was a very kind of minute transient fellatio scene where she sucks him off basically as a 5-year-old child or something. But overall it was I thought the beauty of the book was how I guess understanding it was toward the psyche of the molester. And that's not to say that we should accept pedophiles in our society or that they should be rehabilitated, but I think it really is important to kind of know thine enemies and know the psyches of people unlike you. And I wonder what well, I think
people are afraid of that because you will discover that they're not all that different.
And also a number of them were victims of child molestation. Sure. So that becomes difficult. At what point do you get to transition from being a victim to a perpetrator, and how do we deal with victimization so that the perpetration can be modified or something?
So as a lawyer, do you think that there are any kind of specific policy measures that, or legal measures that can be instated, for example, to like minimize the occurrence of pedophilia or sexual assault?
Yes and no. I mean, I do think that if you had degrees of certain sex offenses, it would be more useful. So there could be something that would be a very low grade where maybe what the person needs is actually, I don't know, some sort of like DUI classes kind of thing, you know, so they can learn about things like how to get consent, how to recognize it. And then, you know, then on the other hand, there's people where they cannot be free in society because they will reoffend over and over again.
There's no restorative justice.
Yeah, whatever it is. One of the reasons I started working with sex offenses was when I did other kinds of crimes, everybody could kind of understand, or they sort of got it. If I was representing a gang member, people may not like gangs, but they do understand that if you're in a gang, there is a chance you might shoot someone. That's part of the ethos of the culture. Or if I was representing a robber, people understood that if you need money and you have no other resources, you might take somebody else's. But when you're doing sex offenses, by and large, most people do not understand why someone would commit a sex offense.
Or why somebody would represent them.
Well, and that's part of it. And I put this body in between, so to speak, the government or the state and that person, because that person has no allies. No one likes that person. And I'm the human face. So if you saw me, when you see me do an art performance, I'm pretty cold.
Sure.
I'm pretty detached. If you see me in a courtroom, I'm very warm. I make jokes. Not rape jokes, but I do make jokes. And because I'm the human face of this person.
Right.
And I think that part of it is that, to me, I don't necessarily understand why someone... You know, there's rape fantasies and then there's different kinds of rape. So the rape fantasy usually for most people doesn't involve, I'm forcing sex on somebody who's vomiting, crying, and scratching and screaming.
That's what I always that's what always confounded me about roofies, like how guys would roofie your drink, which has like happened to all of us at some point. It's like, do you really want to impose yourself on a basically dead body and one that's also like vomiting and shaking?
Some people do. Some people do. And I had a case once, which I just loved this moment, where this man, my client, was starting to rape this woman, and she yelled, please don't, I'm a mother. And he said, I fucking hate my mother. So the very thing that she thought would appeal to some sense of humanity actually just made it even better.
Right. Oh my God.
Or worse. Yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah, well, and Lacan said it at one point where he said he was disputing. Kant says this thing where he says, well, given the choice between a beautiful woman and the gallows, every man would choose a beautiful woman. And Lacan said, no, some men would choose the gallows, especially if they get to kill the beautiful woman first.
Yeah, well,
and Lacan talks about desire also as a kind of like mutilation, as a part of like wanting something that you'll never have access to.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or as we say in New Jersey, love and hate are the same emotion.
They're a lot.
Okay.
Shall we wrap it? What are we on? Like an hour? Okay. Yeah, let's do it. We keep these short.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Vanessa, thank you for stopping
me, so to speak.
Yeah, of course. Everything can be a rape joke. All right, we will see you in hell.